Consider This, with host Carol Schrader, is supported in part by Better Business Equipment and by Nebraskans for Public Television. Consider This, a news and information program recorded on the campus of the University of Nebraska at Omaha. From the Fireside Lounge in the Milo Bale Student Center, here is your host, Carol Schrader.
Hello and welcome once again to Consider This. I know a big topic of conversation at my house is how much it's taking to fill up the tanks of the vehicles that we drive. And no doubt that you've noticed that going to gas up, a little bit of a shock. My guests this week are certainly knowledgeable about the price of gasoline and why it's there and what we can expect. I'd like to welcome Rolf Hansen. He is with the Iowa-Nebraska Petroleum Council. Thank you for coming all the way from Des Moines.
Thank you for having me.
With us.
It's a pleasure to be here.
And a woman who is no stranger to the Omaha Council Bluffs greater metropolitan area, Rose White of AAA Nebraska, otherwise known as Cornhusker AAA. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
I mean, the first thing, it's the gas prices are going up. But what have they sort of done in this year so far compared to last summer and where we expect it to go? Big question, lots of questions. Rose, you sit there and spout these things off on the local TV and radio shows all the time. Give me the kind of quick version.
Yeah, inventory basically is the big concern. Not inventory so much as crude. We have plenty of that right now that's coming in, but inventory of processed fuel. Right now, the inventory levels going into the summer months, we're at about a 17-year low, and that's very dangerous since we're thinking of the onset of the summer travel season is just about 5 weeks away, and so it's very dangerous right now.
Okay, how does this compare to a year ago going into the travel season? Because I remember the stories then, brace yourself a little bit,
Yeah, we're even down compared to last year, which has got us concerned because right now fuel prices are about 25 cents higher than they were at the same time a year ago.
And the inventory's down.
The inventory's down, and last June we had reached our highest prices on record where we were paying an average of $1.84 a gallon in June. Now, with prices right now being 25 cents higher and they're currently at $1.67, we can see how close they are to that $2 level. And so we are asking voters to be prepared. So it could reach that level.
Be prepared. Obviously, you're sort of part of a trade organization representing the oil producers.
Correct.
And you're sort of the Iowa-Nebraska branch of, I guess the umbrella organization is the American Petroleum Institute. And they tend to get bombarded with critics a lot in the political realm and just people in general. Now, I'm going to read some headlines that I got off the internet, and because this is the kind of thing that people read and they go, those darn oil companies. Cabot Oil and Gas announced record first quarter results, profits over tenfold, and cash flow triples. Sunoco, how do you say that? Sunoco reports sharp increases in first quarter earnings. Conoco posts another record quarter. Occidental Petroleum Corp said on Wednesday first quarter earnings rose a greater than expected 90%. And I could go on and on. These are just from the last few days. Because they're reporting in New York on the stock exchange what their profits are. So people, to people, this is a disconnect.
Yes. First of all, I'd like to first of all sympathize. It's when you read the press and you see those headlines, and at the same time you see the price of your gas going up. The first thing a consumer thinks of, they're making a lot of money off me, and skepticism is healthy, and people, it's good to be skeptical and to raise questions. However, I think the way the media has portrayed this starting from last summer through the winter and going into this season, the skepticism has turned into cynicism. And anytime you see an increase in the price of gasoline, they feel that the consumer is getting gouged more and more, depending on how high the increase is. As of a month ago, the Federal Trade Commission issued their report from last summer where they investigated the gas prices, especially in the Midwest.
Right, and as I recall, Senator Bob Kerrey was one of Nebraska then. He's now out of the Senate, but He was one of the people who insisted on some sort of investigation. So they've reported it, and they said.
They said that they found no wrongdoing on part of the oil companies as far as price fixing, collusion, gouging the customer. They did a year-long investigation and found that the reasons for the increased prices were due to 5 factors. Number 1, the price of crude oil. Number 2, environmental regulations set forth by the EPA and state environmental agencies. Number 3, basically supply versus demand, the issue of supply-demand, and taxes, state and federal
Which
tax.
we certainly realize in Nebraska because we have among the
Currently, when you
highest.
fill up your tank here in Nebraska with conventional gasoline, 44.3 cents of that is taxed federal and state. And the 5th reason is kind of an internal matter. It's a patent issue between the oil companies. And if I could just maybe touch on a few of those issues, it might explain where we're at today.
Yeah, and pipe in.
Let's
pipe
go
in.
back to
That's kind of
no
a-
pun
kind of-
intended.
no pun intended.
Back to the issue of supply-demand. When you tell someone it's an issue of supply-demand, they said, "Well, that's too simple. It just that can't be the issue here."
Well, there's some pretty clear things that you could stand before an economics 101 class and go into, which
Right.
I'm sure you will right
And
now.
as Rose alluded to earlier, the issue right now is not having enough crude oil. The issue is being able to process that into gasoline. In 1980, the United States had over 350 refineries in the country. Today, we're down to 149. We've seen a decrease in the number of refineries.
So in other words,
able
even
to
if the pipeline going into the refineries in a sense is pretty big, you still can only turn so much out
Exactly.
Right.
in a given period of time on
Right.
a 24-hour basis or 8-hour basis a day, however they work.
Correct. And the reason refineries have gone down have either been financial, environmental regulations. They weren't up to code and they didn't want to invest the money because it wasn't profitable. And a new refinery in this country hasn't been built since the mid-'70s.
In fact, wasn't there a refinery fire?
There was a refinery fire a couple days ago
Yeah.
in California. You had a refinery in Illinois shut down in February, and that refinery supplied 80,000 barrels of gasoline a day to Chicago. That's got to be made up now. And each year the demand for gasoline is increasing, and these refineries are maxed out at how much they can produce. They're operating at about 95% capacity.
Okay, let's just take that issue for a minute. And there are so many facets to this. It is not, just what goes in comes out, and shouldn't it be priced a certain way? The oil industry has known this. They've known that the number of refineries is going down. I'm not saying they should automatically build new because there are environmental regulations and whatnot, but the trend to larger vehicles and more drivers driving larger vehicles has been clear, and there doesn't seem to be an end in sight. So, I mean, don't they plan?
Well,
Or is it just money up front that it costs?
Right. I think there's a couple points there. First of all, as you know, the marketplace is driven by the consumer, and the consumers have asked for bigger vehicles.
Right? I mean, so
burning
they can
more
put that on
fuel.
their own backs.
We're guilty.
And now, as far as keeping up with the product, if we look back 3 years ago, the price of crude oil was $11 a barrel. And at that time is when you saw these oil companies start to merge because they weren't surviving, it wasn't profitable
The profit margins
to
were
stay.
going down, yeah.
You saw ExxonMobil merge together to form the largest oil company now. BP, Amoco, and Arco formed one. Currently, Chevron and Texaco are merging into a single company because they're competing on a global market. You have to remember they're just distributing gas and producing gasoline all over the world, not just in the United States. And as far as why a refinery has not been built, number one, it's the environmental regulations. Refineries have been opposed by environmental groups and local organizations. No one wants a refinery built in their city or in their backyard. And quite honestly, an air permit for a refinery in the end run, that piece of paper will cost more than the entire refinery itself, with all the loopholes that you have to go through.
Okay, let's take that issue, because we heard the same thing during, I mean, we've just gone through, and I think the reason that our skin is even more sensitive, you know, like healing skin and you know, starts to get scratched again, is because we just went through with natural gas. And certainly California, you know, would point a finger, and then somebody would point a finger back saying, but you wouldn't let us build these power plants and the environmental restrictions, even if you would let us build one there. Doesn't it seem to you, I mean, just as, forget who you can't forget who you are for a minute, but doesn't it seem to you that some strategic planning from a national perspective?
And that's what we've been lacking. You know, we've been a country without any sort of national energy plan. But we do know, though, that President Bush has made that a major priority, and he currently has Vice President Cheney working on that as far as pulling in all of the elements of this energy crisis, whether it's for our home or for our cars, to try to develop some solutions to these problems that we're having. And we're very anxiously awaiting for some response now out of the federal government as to what kind of plan they are putting in place. But you're absolutely right. We need a plan.
And with regard to environmental restrictions, there is no question that I mean, you can debate the science, and you can say, let's try to get away from the extremes for a minute and just say, there's no question that we do create pollution in this country, and we do create it at an extremely high rate compared to the rest of the world. Okay. That's just a fact. Whether it's causing us to turn into turnips in another century, and dried up old turnips and we all die, I'm not going to get into that. But surely in the strategic planning there is some room from the oil companies to knowing that this is the way it is.
Correct. Actually, and to a couple of facts that Rose has mentioned, I think you will see this next Congress develop a national energy policy. This country, probably the largest industrial country in the world, does not have a national energy policy. And each year, the country consumes more and more energy, whether it be gasoline, natural gas, heating oil, and
Duh!
Over the last 40 years, you know, we've been able to expand in the industry with what we have already had in place.
Right, but you've maxed it.
And we've
basically
maxed
all
out.
energy industries in this country have maxed out, even in terms of nuclear energy, because those plants are getting old.
But we've created some of our own problems as well. As an example, the refineries now, collectively, they're manufacturing over 50 different blends of fuel. Now, each refinery can only maybe manufacture 15, and so what we run into are regional deliveries of that fuel.
And didn't we have a problem with that last year? There's something called a summer mix or something, and it has to do with the way the air is in the summer and trying to keep, you know, that sort of that cap that forms over cities and all that.
And I'll touch on that briefly, and that is essentially why we're seeing a price increase currently. First of all, there are two basic gasolines. There's conventional gasoline, which we use here in the state of Nebraska and in Iowa and the Dakotas, and then they have reformulated gasoline, which is your clean gasoline
for the big cities with
that's used in
pollution
Chicago,
problems.
Milwaukee, where they have air quality problems. The reformulated gasoline is more difficult to make, number one. If it takes a barrel of oil to get 1 gallon of gasoline, it takes a barrel and a half oil to make a gallon of reformulated, because it has to be refined more and more. So you need more input at the beginning to get the same amount of output. And those large markets, during the summertime months, the gasoline evaporates at a faster rate when it's warmer. And that's in all gasoline. And due to federal law, we have a wintertime gasoline, even here in Nebraska, and a summertime gasoline. And the summertime gasoline has to be in the retailer's tanks by May 15th.
And that was one of the problems we had last year, was getting enough of that in at the right time, and therefore that there's a smaller scale supply-demand problem.
Yeah. There are a couple other things that happened at that same time. The same time the Supreme Court held up a federal ruling on a patent that Unocal had developed on a special reformulated fuel blend that basically said, hey, if you other refineries are using our formula, you're now going to have to pay us royalties. And so their engineers were sent scrambling to develop their own formulas then. They did contact the federal government last year in January saying, we need an extension of this deadline, which the government said, no, you must meet that deadline.
No short-term relief.
In fact, that they were not going to be able or going to be struggling to meet that. And so we did see a crisis develop last year. The federal government has let them know this year, if you foresee problems, let us know in advance. We're willing to work with you. And so that's going to help a little bit this year.
So given these things that we're talking about specifically this year and these formulas and working at capacity and changing over in the refineries from one formula to another and just the complications, we're kind of in between a rock and a hard place right now in terms of because the profit margin on gas, and I never thought I'd sound like I was backing up the oil company. I mean, just personally, I mean, you sit at home like anybody and you want to point a finger. But the profit margin on gasoline is not as large
As people think.
as many other industries.
Right.
Certainly not as much as in a Microsoft product.
Yeah, you look at the commodity price right now, it's $1.02 for a gallon of processed fuel. You add on top of that 18.4 cents in federal taxes, 23.9 in state gas taxes here in Nebraska, another 0.9 cents for the underground storage tank fee. It already brings you up to the $1.45, $1.46 level. And of course, on top of that, you have to add the transportation delivery fees, profit margin for the retail stations, overhead costs, and so you can see how quickly those prices rise to the current average we're at.
So the person that's at home, before we get to the part where they should put a little of the blame on themselves, the person at home, part of it is that we feel powerless. We feel powerless. And we're not powerless in our choice of vehicles, which we'll talk about, but we do feel very powerless. Our natural gas prices exploded. You know, and we had that effect. Many people are still haven't even paid their bills, and then we have this, and this is basically to and from work and that kind of thing. What would you have to say to them?
Well, and this is why we need the need for a national energy policy. These problems are not going to go away, and you know, this scenario is going to happen every year, and every year it's going to get worse unless we do something. Because, you know, this year alone, they predict the consumption and going up 2%. Well, you saw how it was last summer. Now we've got the demand going up another 2%, and we're already maxed out. And the problem of why the inventories are so low is last summer we were busy making gasoline to try to meet the summer driving demand. Well, then winter came. Now the refineries have to switch over and start producing heating oil. And it was a cold winter, especially in the Northeast. They were making more and more heating oil, cutting back on the gasoline.
And the reserves.
And now we're coming to spring again, and now the inventories are low on gasoline because they're out making heating oil, and now they've got to gear up to make the summertime gasoline. So, and you know, they'll be making gasoline in the summer again. Then the inventories for heating oil will be low, so there'll be a shortage of heating oil in the fall and getting into the winter, and then we'll be right back where we were at this time next year. So there is a great need, and I believe the president made it a campaign issue, and he's acting on it now. There's a broad coalition of natural gas, oil, electricity, all calling for a national energy policy to avoid
those
these
people are
problems.
also calling for, and I don't mean to sound mean, but they're also calling for, you know, they'll be working to get as few environmental restrictions as possible. And you know, I don't know how it's all going to shake out, but I think there's generally felt that we do need to take care of our environment to one degree or another, depending on where you are on the scale.
Right.
There is concern, I think, partially because the president comes from an oil background, that we're not going to get a fair shake on that. He's already, you know, done some things that make people a little concerned. And then on the other hand, you have people that are screaming, this is why we need to open up the ANWR reserves up in Alaska. And I wouldn't want to see a knee-jerk reaction on either side, because that's not good public policy.
No, but I think what they're going to do, though, Carol, is for the first time, they're going to get everyone at the table from all the different elements that affect the energy industry, pull them together, find out what kind of problems do you have, what concerns do you have, is there any way that we can still make this issue work without affecting the environment? And if there's compromises to be made, maybe they will be made. But again, like I said, for the first time, it's going to be pulling everyone together, where oftentimes they've been at opposite ends, not even communicating on certain issues. And so I think that whatever happens, like I said, some good is going to come out of it.
The other thing that I said I would be amiss not to talk about is we certainly scream when the prices go up, but our insatiable demand for bigger vehicles.
Yes.
It is just amazing to me. And sometimes In fact, we own a kind of a beater truck and an Explorer and a Ford Escort station wagon. And we are limited. We're limited more than we were 5 years ago in the size of the SUVs we can buy. Say we need a four-wheel drive vehicle, because I used to work in the middle of the night at a radio station, and I wanted to be able to get there in the middle of winter. They're just all upscale bigger. Even if you want, I used to have a little Jeep. Got 10 miles to the gallon more than the one I have now. When are we going to say enough is enough on our part?
Yeah, we have to take responsibility for this. America is a glutton for fuel, you know, and we do abuse that privilege. But there are certain things that we can do individually to help conserve fuel. Collectively, it would make a difference, but individually we have to take responsibility and help to conserve fuel.
This is your area of expertise, Rose. I've heard you run through these a million times, but it never hurts. There's some things, even in this pamphlet that AAA has, the Gas Watcher's Guide, that I forget. You know, that I maybe did at one point when I was feeling the pinch, as I will again. But there are some ways to kind of self-monitor and just cut down on what you're doing now.
There's some great tips in there. We will provide that free to anybody who contacts us at AAA. But you know, as an example, look at the vehicles in your family. Figure out who drives the greatest distance and let that person drive the most fuel-efficient vehicle. Another thing is, in the summertime, we all want to turn our air conditioners on full blast. That does use excessive fuel, and so if you can, tolerate the heat a little bit more, roll down the windows, dress more comfortably maybe when you are in the car. And if you have extra weight in your vehicle, maybe in the trunk, you might have some things left over in your winter car care kit. If you don't need them, get rid of them. Keep your tires properly inflated, and also change your air filter regularly. All those things will help to improve your fuel efficiency.
And running errands. I find that when the price of gas goes up, I plan my errands, and it really does cut
Makes a
down
big
on
difference.
mileage. I won't make a trip that I could make tomorrow.
Right.
Or if I'm going out in a certain part of town where I have a favorite store, I'll think, what other things? And it has, you know, just being a lot more conscious of that. But we're kind of used to the fact that we don't have the time to even plan our lives, let alone our errands. But it can be done.
It makes a huge difference, especially if you're a commuter. You might pass several grocery stores on the way back home, but yet you think, oh, I got to go shopping on Saturday. Try to plan or change those shopping errands to maybe be along that line where you're driving to and from work. It'll help a lot in conserving fuel.
Do the oil companies, and they do make a lot of money in raw dollars, and it seems so huge to us, you know, billions and hundreds of billions of dollars, and they do a pretty good job, but they become a political pawn, and a lot of this that we're going to see ahead, we're going to see some political posturing on both ends of the spectrum in trying to set up a national energy policy. It kind of bothers me that we do that on every issue. We make it so big, and we use a lot of scare tactics. You know, there won't be enough gas for you, or they're trying to gouge you, or, I mean, are you hopeful? Are you optimistic that an honest discussion will take place?
I'm very hopeful about this. I've seen it here even within Nebraska, where when certain issues have come up in the legislative arena, that people have been on opposite ends of the table, but yet they're not communicating with each other. They kind of hold steady on their ground. With this strategic plan and drawing all these different elements together and experts in their field, I'm hoping they'll be able to work together and consider the nation that this is a national crisis, and we've got to come up with some answers.
Do you think there's the political will to do you remember when the Arab oil embargo, and they were and maybe people will still consider this unfair, I'm sure that the car companies did, where they had to produce a certain amount of vehicles. I know that was forced consumption, and I'm not saying that's the answer, but that did have an impact on the gasoline used in this country. You know, is any politician that's going to be maybe against ANWR or something else going to have the fire in their belly to say, and you've got to drive smaller cars, and I'm going to drive a smaller car?
Well, Rose, you may correct me if I'm wrong, but I think as of right now, the car manufacturers have to meet quotas as to fuel efficiency of their vehicles.
So that's still they have to have, it has to balance out,
Right.
to an, as I recall, to an average mile per gallon.
Correct.
But that has moved, I believe that has moved up that average?
Well, the
Maybe
problem
I'm wrong.
is I believe the SUVs, the sport utility vehicles, have kind of been pulled away from that average rating because they don't really qualify as a passenger car.
I think they're in the
And,
trucks category or
So there's
something.
been
Like-
some adjustments there where basically it's thrown
Little
off the
fudge
formula.
factor.
Exactly. Yes.
And
But
again, I don't believe in forcing people to do things, and I don't
Mm-hmm.
believe in forcing companies, but there is going to have to be some give and take here.
exactly.
Well, and back to your earlier question, I think something will be accomplished with the national energy policy. I think all the country their eyes have been opened up quite widely to this is a crisis. You're having brownouts in California. You're seeing increased gas prices, and it's been going up every year. Now, you can separate the issue of ANWR from a national energy policy. That may be one component of it, but that seems to be a little more political than a national energy policy as a whole. I will point out, though, that right now we're reliant. 57% of the crude oil comes from OPEC.
And they expect that percentage to go up
To
in the
increase.
next several years.
And at the same time, over the last 10 years, oil companies' access to federal land here in the United States has decreased by 67%.
For drilling.
For drilling, whether it be for oil or natural gas. So we're going to need to look, part of that policy is going to have to look at what can we do domestically to increase production. And, the environmental question is there, as well it should be. Like you mentioned, I don't think there's anyone in this country that wants a dirty environment. They don't want dirty air or water. And I
But
think
we're
it's
so sensitive to prices. I mean, politics is so pocketbook sensitive.
Right.
Europe has been used to the fact that prices have gone up, and still there is a very widespread environmental movement. I mean, it's not like they're totally incompatible, even though they're what we call a lot of radicals over there. I mean, this country would say there's a lot of radicals over there, but they also know that what they pay is a function of some of the concessions they've made environmentally.
And what makes it such a hot topic is I can't think of any other industry that puts their price in 3-foot letters and puts them 50 feet in the air so you can see them from 2 miles away. And when you can see the price switching every day, you take notice to that, and it becomes very, it's more than political, it's a social issue. You'll see people drive 4 blocks to save a penny on gas. It may cost them that dime in gas to get over there, but it's
Plus, energy is one of those fuel products that has such a rippling effect in our entire economy. You see the prices go up and all of a sudden your delivery fees are increasing on different goods and services. It just has a tremendous rippling effect through the entire economy.
And as the president noted when he sort of rescinded some of Clinton's environmental air quality standards, that this is not the time, a lot of people say this is not the time to mess around with certain things. I mean, so we're real sensitive to that. I sure want to thank you for being with us today. It's just a point of discussion. We're not going to solve the problem here. Rolf Hansen of the Iowa-Nebraska Petroleum Council came over from Des Moines. Thanks. And Rose White, always a pleasure to have you from AAA Nebraska. And watch how much you drive around. Thanks for joining us this week on Consider This. See you next week.
Consider This with host Carol Schrader is supported in part by Better Business Equipment and by Nebraskans for Public Television.